Hello and welcome to the first recorded lecture of the course. Um, this is the first reading in our unit on laws of nature, uh, David Hume. So he's writing in the 1700s. When you tried to read it, it may have been a little difficult. The language is a little archaic. It's always tough when they're writing in English. If they're writing in, Latin or Greek, they'll translate it for you. Someone will translate it for you. If they're writing in English a couple hundred years ago, it's practically a different language, but no one will translate it for you. Um, but I'm going to, explain it for you here. Sometimes it's a recognizable form of reasoning, right, to what we do in contemporary philosophy, but it's not quite as straightforward as we do these days. So hopefully by the end of this lecture, you'll have a little better grasp on what Hume's on about. First of all, you may notice he never uses the word law of nature, right? Instead, he talks about things called like power, force, necessary, connection. But essentially, his uh, account of necessary connection, or really the lack thereof, is kind of the foundation of where we start when we're trying to formulate uh, accounts of laws of nature. So Hume starts out just noting various types of problems that we run into when we're reasoning, right? He's not necessarily talking at first about laws of nature. One problem you'll run into sometimes, and you probably have if you're doing mathematics or geometry, is there'll be a chain of reasoning that just is so long, right, that you're worried that at some point you might make a mistake, right? If you're doing math, you might forget to carry a one or something like that. That's not the kind of worries he's thinking about right now, right? Other other cases, the problem is that we're trying to reason about something, and the concepts we're using are actually not very well defined, right? Um, and he thinks that's a serious problem when we're thinking about uh, laws of nature. Among these ill-defined concepts that he wants to talk about are power, force, energy, and necessary connection, right? And these are all come into play in science. And if you think about it, they are a little vague, right? What is force exactly? Newton's laws invoke force, but it's only sort of implicitly defined, right, as like mass times acceleration. But it's hard to say what force is on its own, right? And Hume notices this, and so he wants to dig into it and see, well, can we do a better job of defining these terms, right? So you should know off the bat, if you've ever studied Hume, you'll know he's an empiricist, right? So what it means to be an empiricist is that he thinks all of your concepts, all of your ideas, everything that's in your brain um, is ultimately derived from sense impressions, right? You're not born with any ideas. It all comes in through the eyes or the ears or the nose, through your senses. So sensation will give us basic concepts. I look at a tree, and that's how I get my concept of a tree, actually by looking at probably a bunch of trees, right? Um, so, concept house. Well, I see houses, I experience houses through my senses. That's how I get my concept of house. Dollar, right? Sure, I'll see a dollar bill, right? I'll experience, buying stuff with it. That all comes in through my senses. And then I can get more complex concepts by combining those basic ones. So I might have a concept like household economy if I have a concept of a house and a concept of a dollar. And you keep combining and combining, and you can get some pretty complicated and abstract concepts. Um, Now, if you think too hard about it, there's definitely problems for empiricism, right? You might wonder, can you really construct every concept out of these basic building blocks? But for now, let's take that for granted. Um, so, if we're wondering, well, what is this concept of power or force or necessary connection that seems to be involved in science? Uh, where does that come from, right? And he says, well, you'll just need to trace it back, right, to its sensory roots, right? If it's some sort of complex concept, it should have been built out of sense impressions, or if it's a basic concept, then we should have some sensory experience of necessary connection or power or force. Um, Whatever they are, right, whatever it's built out of, or whatever it is, it should be clear and distinct, just like sensation. Just as clearly as I see a tree, I should just as clearly see power or force or necessary connection or the concepts that it's built out of. So what could be the original sensory image, right, from which we get this concept of necessary connection? And Hume says there isn't one. So, for example, here's where we might you might be wondering when do we invoke necessary connection, right? So like, billiard balls, right? I hit a ball, and if I know the physics and I know the math, um, and I know the forces involved, I should be able to predict where that ball will go, right? If science is good for anything, it's predicting those sorts of things, right? If I shoot a cannon at a castle, right? If I've got it all lined up and I know the wind resistance and the weight and all that, and all of the variables, I can predict with reasonable accuracy where the thing will go. Um, so that's one area we might think about necessary connection. So billiard balls is a nice simple example, right? Um, so when I'm playing pool, right, and I'm hitting a ball and I'm predicting where it will go, or I'm trying to, um, where's the necessary connection? Is there a sensory experience of necessary connection? And Hume says, actually, no, right? Let's look at what I experience when I play pool. Um, right? I see the cue hit a ball. I see that ball roll. I see the ball hit another ball, right? And then I see that other ball roll. But that's all I saw. I didn't see any force. I didn't see any power. I didn't see any necessary connection, right? In fact, there was nothing necessary about it. Right? I couldn't like predict exactly where the ball would go. If I'm a really good pool player and I played a lot of pool, I'll start to be able to predict it, right? But imagine it's your first time playing pool, you've never heard of it before in your life, you've never used a cue, right? You're not going to be able to just look at it and see the force like it's some sort of arrow or something, right? And know exactly where the pool ball is going to go. I once took LSD and I thought I could see the lines of force, right? I did get pretty good at pool, but I don't think I was seeing necessary connection. I think I was. So yeah, Hume says you can't, right? You're not, there's no sensory impression of the necessary connection in these situations. Okay, well, if it's not like an immediate sensory thing, right? Um, maybe there's some other options, right? Maybe it comes from somewhere else. Maybe it comes from introspection, right? So an, another type of causation, right? Another sort of force um, that we talk about is the what's involved when we move our own bodies, right? So I will myself to raise my hand, and it happens, right? So it's kind of like hitting a pool ball and it rolls away. I think move my hand and something happens, right? A movement happens, some sort of force is involved, um, and it's pretty reliable, right? So is there a necessary connection there? Is that how I get it, right? And Hume says, well, no, actually, the situation's pretty much parallel to those billiard balls. All I really observed, right, even, introspecting was a willing experience and then my hand moving, right? But I didn't actually see anything necessary about it. I didn't see the force or whatever, right? The power happening. It was just, again, two events following each other, right? Now, when I observe it repeatedly, right, I start to come to expect the thing, and I even start to think I can predict it. But um, here's one way he says you can know that actually you couldn't predict it, right? You're not observing any willing. He says try to move. You can't will all of your body parts to move. So try right now to will your liver to move, right? Well, nothing happens, right? But did you notice anything different? Did you notice an absence of force or an absence of power? No, you had the same sort of experience of willing. It feels exactly the same to will your hand to move or to will your liver to move. So Hume says, right? You have that thought that goes in your head. In the hand case, your hand actually moves. In the liver case, it didn't, right? Um, but but you didn't see any intervening force, anything right between the two that wasn't there that time, right? So he says whatever the difference is, right, between moving your hand and not being able to move your liver, um, that difference isn't accessible through introspection, right? So he thinks that our concept of force or necessary connection, um, we don't get it from external sensation, from looking at the world, and we also don't get it from introspection, from looking at ourselves. Similarly, right, still on this subject of like maybe it's an introspective thing, he says if you were suddenly paralyzed, suppose you were in an accident, right, and you awake from the car accident, and unbeknownst to you, right, you are now paralyzed from the neck down. Um, what would that experience be like? Well, you'd have a willing, you'd try to move your hand, and then nothing would happen, right? It would be like trying to will your liver to move. Um, but that's all you would notice, right? You would just notice that the the usual event would not happen. You wouldn't notice, right? You would come awake and you'd be like, oh, I can tell that the power is gone, the necessary connection is gone. No, you wouldn't notice that, right? Here's a fellow, this picture, just to explain what it is. They now have, you can now actually, paralyzed people can, right, they can sort of latch onto your brain waves and you can move, they can move their body with their mind with the help of a exoskeleton. So it's like a very elaborate version of what we do, not paralyzed. It's pretty cool. Maybe not directly related to the Hume. I just wanted the picture there. So yeah, but again, you awake right from the car accident and you're surprised that your arm doesn't move, right? You don't immediately notice something's missing, the power is gone. No, because you never observed it in the first place, right? And anyway, if you know anything about anatomy, right, you know that your will doesn't move your arms really, right? There's a series of neurons that are all connected, right? And they fire in a series. So what your willing actually does is fire a neuron somewhere, right, in your brain or in your uh, in the at the top of the spine, right? And it's the other nerves that move your arm, and you don't have that's definitely not part of your conscious experience. Oh, I'm willing my nerve to fire, right? That's actually what's happening. So he's saying introspectively, we have actually really no access to what's going on. Right? If there's any force or power going on, we're not experiencing it. We have a concept of it, we're sure not getting it from experience, right? So we can't have a concept of it because he's an empiricist. Okay, so it's not right external perception. It's not introspection. What else is there, right? And he says, well, maybe it's not introspection of the power of the will to move the body, but maybe we get the idea of force or necessary connection by the experience of our mind calling forth ideas, right? So maybe that's more direct, right? And maybe that's our conscious experience is exactly, whereas he's right to say when I move my hand, I'm actually causing a nerve to fire and I don't have any conscious experience of that. But when it's just thinking of ideas, well, that's all in consciousness. So maybe I do have access to that sort of causation, right? And maybe that's where I get my idea. And he says, well, look, it's pretty cool, right? It's pretty amazing being able to call forth ideas out of nothing, right? It's such an incredible ability that if we were observing that force, if that force existed, right, surely we couldn't miss it, right? We should notice it. Then he says, well, what is our experience of having ideas come to us? It's exactly just them coming out of nothing, right? We don't observe any particular power that allowed us to bring forth the idea. They just come and they go, right? Um, and then he uses sort of a parallel argument to the liver case, right? Some ideas I do, I'll think, okay, I have to think hard about, how I'm going to write this paper, and it's sort of very effortful. But there's other times where ideas just come and go, and you seem to have no power over them. Sometimes they're intrusive, and you wish they wouldn't come, right? Uh, don't think about pink elephants, and now you all thought about pink elephants, right? So, and you notice there's not, you don't notice any difference in those cases, right? When I'm trying hard to think about something, and when something just appears, um, just like when I try to move my arm and I can do it, and I have no control over my liver, we don't notice the difference between the ideas we control and the ideas we don't control, right? Um, and so it seems like there should be a difference if we're observing, one is a force, a power that we're using, and the other is not. So again, he says, even in introspection of our mind bringing forth ideas, we're not observing any power or necessary connection or anything like that. Okay, well, we're starting to run out of options here. Maybe God? Is it God who's doing it, right? Um, every time we hit a cue ball, does God intervene, right? And he's what necessitates, right, that the ball will always move at a certain angle, right? Um, but he says, well, hold on, right? We're empiricists here, right? I'm asking where is our idea of necessary connection from? If it comes from God, we're not observing God, right? Nobody's observed God. So that's sort of a dead end for an empiricist, right? Um, so to conclude, he says, look, really all we ever observe is a series of events, right? Um, he says they seem conjoined but never connected. It means they're repeated over and over, right? It starts to seem like maybe there's some necessity, but we never observe the necessity, right? All we know, I could hit the billiard ball, and the next time it could never go anywhere. It could totally stop. It could fly straight up, right? It could evaporate. Um, there's nothing in what we observe that necessitates that the billiard ball should be regularly. Um, and since our concepts only have content if they can be traced back to some impression, because he's an empiricist, it turns out that these concepts of power, force, necessary connection are just totally meaningless concepts. Now, later in the course, we'll see that there's many subtle interpretations of Hume. There's a lot of scholarship on it. We'll read some bit on this later when we get to causation, where they're kind of analyzing the same Hume reading and they're drawing some more subtle distinctions out of it. But for now, let's say Hume is saying um, that the concept of force or power and necessary connection or law-like behavior is empty, right? We never observe it, so the concept is just like meaningless. Unless, right? Here's the only way that our concept of power and necessary connection could have a meaning, which is maybe all we actually mean by it is what we observe, and what we observe is constant conjunction of events, right? We regularly see billiard balls behaving the same way over and over, right? And that we do observe. We observe the regularities, right? Um, and if we, so the question is, what is our concept? Is it just regularity? If we think it's any more than that, then we're wrong, right? But if we say, oh, all I ever meant, right, by necessary connection is just that it's be very regular. I've observed it over and over, then that would be fine for Hume because we do observe that, right? So that's what we'll see in the next reading, right? Again, Hume never uses the word law here, but necessary connection is roughly what laws of nature are supposed to be, right? They're supposed to be things that necessitate the phenomena we observe in the world, right? So why can't I jump to the moon? Laws of physics are stopping me, right? Why do I have to grow old and die? Laws of biology are making it happen. And so now, after reading Hume, right, and him saying, I don't observe anything making anything happen. I just see regularities, right? Um, he's hoping, right, that at this point you'll think, yeah, that actually is kind of weird. Like, what does it mean for laws to make something happen or to necessitate something? Are the laws of nature like pushing the planets around? Uh, it seems sort of mysterious, and this is Hume's point, right, to sort of shake you out of this. Um, right, that you've kind of sort of always assumed that, yeah, I guess the laws of nature make things happen, but he's like, what in the world could that actually mean, right? So we're going to read next a more contemporary philosopher, and the language will hopefully be a little bit easier to follow, who's going to drive this point home a little more clearly. So this is regularity theory of the laws of nature. Hume introduces it, and then our next reading will drive it home and a little bit easier to understand language. All right.